Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's an Altman-esque romp when I put Alan Rudolph's Welcome to LA against Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. And like I said, it was a very Altman-esque romp. So let's just dive right on into the first one. We have Alan Rudolph's Welcome to LA, which is the debut directorial effort from Alan Rudolph. He wrote and directed the film. And of course, Alan Rudolph got his start as Robert Altman's second unit director on several of his films, or, all of the great Altman pictures and stuff. And then also, like, Robert Altman produces the film as well through his then company, Lionsgate Film. And the film itself is, got a few of the regular Altman players, like Keith Carradine, Sally Kellerman, and even somebody else, but it slips my mind. But, and Lauren Hutton pops up too. She was also in A Wedding, so I guess that counts. But it has a kind of a Altman-esque vibe to it. It's got a lot of the interweaving storylines, multiple characters and stuff. And, it's kind of, it opens with Keith Carradine doing the opening song. We also see Geraldine Chaplin, who was in Robert Altman's Nashville. And, we kind of see him coming in, and he's the son of a millionaire lawyer guy, and this is played by Denver Pyle, and then Harvey Keitel, who's probably the best one in the movie. The acting, for as much talent that's in this movie, you'd think that the acting would be better. But, yet again, this was Alan Rudolph's first film, so he's still kind of trying to find his voice, and you can clearly see the influence that he got from Robert Altman. But the thing about it is, the only person that could do Altman is Altman, and Alan Rudolph, did better films after this, but this one was just kind of all over the place. And what really kills the movie the most is the music by David Raskin, and then hearing him sing those songs all through the film, and, kind of matching up to in a way they are used to punctuate everybody's emotions in the film. And, these actors should be capable of conveying the emotions needed without having to hear David Raskin just sing some of the droniest fucking shitty lyric stuff that I've ever heard. It's abysmal at best, and kind of takes away from what could be a great movie, because like Keith Carradine was no slouch. This was kind of the transition period for him, where he was kind of done doing Altman films, and he started doing Alan Rudolph films in a bunch, because he would go on to do shit like Choose Me, Trouble in Mind, and The Moderns, all directed by Alan Rudolph, and all better than Welcome to LA. So, a lot of times you can't really fault a director for their first film, and, sometimes they're not always as explosive as you'd want them. And even if they're great, they're still flawed and stuff, And it's one of those things, it's kind of the empty decadence of LA that they're trying to portray, and it just kind of comes off whack as shit. Even Keith Carradine is phoning it in. From here, you got Sissy Spacek as the topless maid. There's this shit just all over the place. And of course, like I said, everybody's fucking each other. Like Geraldine Chaplin's character is married to the Harvey Keitel character. She's dying. He doesn't really know it, and all this stuff. And then he's fucking like 3 other women, and then Geraldine Chaplin's trying to fuck Keith Carradine. It's like it's dizzying almost, and there's not really that good of a catharsis or anything. Like I said, even David Raskin gets tired of singing about the shit and just says fuck it, and it just kind of ends on such a whimsical note that is just like, well, what the fuck did I just watch type thing. And then we move on to Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, which was his third feature, And in the case of Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, this was his follow-up to Boogie Nights, and Boogie Nights at that time for Paul Thomas Anderson was the greatest thing that he had done and was possibly ever going to do, and it's kind of like his Pulp Fiction in a way. Like, how the fuck is he going to follow up Boogie Nights? And, he also he's dealing with the death of his father around this time, and so he takes all that fear and neuroses and all that shit and just puts it in one 3-hour Altman-esque film. It is one director that fully understands Robert Altman, and it probably is Paul Thomas Anderson, because the one thing Paul Thomas Anderson understands is that nobody can be Altman but Altman. These are just, they kind of make the same movies. Altman makes the kind of films that Paul Thomas Anderson wants to make. And of course, a lot of the players from the Altman troupe pop up in here. You know, we see Henry Gibson, Michael Murphy, even Philip Baker Hall, who played Nixon in Robert Altman's Secret Honor. But the film itself has such a phenomenal cast, you know, kind of the same thing with Welcome to LA. It's a interconnected story of a bunch of random people that end up running together, a lot of coincidence. You know, there's kind of that pretentious opening that at the end, it's kind of setting you up for what you're about to see. You know, the beauty of Magnolia is it's not really ashamed of what it is, even if at times it probably should be a little ashamed of what it is. But the cast itself is so phenomenal and is a testament to show how great Paul Thomas Anderson is at directing actors, you know, because on top of the few players that pop up from the Robert Altman troupe, by that time, Paul Thomas Anderson had established an acting troupe of his own that included Philip Seymour Hoffman, John C. Reilly, Julianne Moore, most of the people that were in Boogie Nights. And, you know, they're taking that a step further. You know, of course, Julianne Moore, one of the greatest actors of all time, as well as Philip Seymour Hoffman, rest in peace. You know, and his role is so understated as the nurse. Jason Robards plays this big TV producer guy that's dying, and he's trying to reconnect with his son that's played by Tom Cruise, a guy named Frank T.J. Matthews, one of those misogynistic fucking self-help gurus that try to get incels laid and shit. And, you know, honestly, the finest hour of Tom Cruise's acting career, in my opinion, because, you know, you really get this motherfucker to cry and let it all loose. You know, it's a very emotional scene. And William H. Macy, of course, you know, playing like one of the saddest losers he's ever played in a film. And that's saying something for William H. Macy, you know, and even just the side characters like Alfred Molina's in this, you know, also he was in Boogie Nights as well. And, you know, the film itself is a tad indulgent, you know, but it's done so in a way that you can almost excuse the indulgence, because this is clearly a motherfucker that knows how to make a movie. Definitely an entertaining one, you know. And this man, you know, why can't you make epics that are, you know, 3 hours plus, just about ordinary human beings? And somehow he manages to pull it off, you know, because these characters are very interesting. You know, John C. Reilly plays a cop that likes to talk to himself. I get it. It's usually the most intelligent conversation I have in a day, you know. And of course, William H. Macy, sad ass loser, Tom Cruise, you know, playing just a dick, you know. And the thing about it is, Tom Cruise always shined when he had to play a douchebag, and he fucking excels in this. And, you know, the biggest centerpiece, though, is the frog rain. You know, that shit, if you remember anything about this movie, it's the frog rain. And that is one of the most intense sequences that I've ever seen in a film. And as far as the music goes, the Amy Mann songs are a lot better than have to hear David Raskin fucking drone on it. Even if that fucking scene sequence where they have the little sing-along to Wise Up, I'm like, come on now. That's probably the dumbest thing in the movie, but almost honestly, the frog rain kind of redeems itself. And, you know, and the film has a clear catharsis. You know, you may have issues with that final frame, but at least it's not some fucking freeze frame bullshit. We kind of understand, you know, the frog rain made the one chick that was Jimmy Gator's daughter, you know, she didn't want drugs and was trying to change her life around and stuff, you know. And so, you know, everybody kind of turns their shit around. They kind of get over their own bullshit. They realize with this freak occurrence how like full of shit they are, you know, like the quiz kid guy, you know, who cares if you piss yourself in front of live television? None of this shit matters, you know, fucking frog rain. You know, so this round clearly goes to Magnolia, because both of these movies are like, they have their flaws, far from perfect, but that's just how annoying Welcome to LA was, you know, pretty fucking garbage, you know. And Paul Thomas Anderson, also one of the greatest directors of all time, you know. That man really has not had a bad note, you know. You might call his shit a little indulgent or something, especially Magnolia, you know, and that's merited. But you got some of the greatest performances that are so understated from actors that usually have to go over the top in the hands of lesser directors. But it's like he lets his actors understate their performances, and he allows his filmmaking to be over the top to make it go in the way that it needs to go. And, you know, this is a beautiful epic, you know, a lot of emotions and stuff. And it goes the places. The thing about Paul Thomas Anderson as well is that he understands what 70s cinema was, and he understands what 70s cinema could be, and that he is one of the great artists of the 90s that probably is the reason that the 90s could win this whole shit show of a fucking excavation, you know. But for anybody keeping score, that's 32-30. The 70s are only up by 2 now, but like I said, the 90s are kicking ass right now. They're coming back with a vengeance. You know, it's great artists like Paul Thomas Anderson that made that decade what it was and kind of carried on the torch of what the great artists of the 70s had left. Specifically Robert Altman, you know, that man, you know, basically the Godard of the 70s for America, you know, and he wasn't even trying to be. That's the thing. He had a clear, distinct voice, and that's what sets Paul Thomas Anderson you know, apart from all the rest of these hacks. You know, this motherfucker has something to say. He's got a clear voice and knows how to direct actors, knows how to write dialogue. You know, even if it is a bit tad on the over dramatic side, definitely not his best for dialogue. But as far as like this whole operatic piece that he puts together, you know, and also, you know, very big love for Amy Mann songs, it works despite its best efforts. So 70s are only up by 2 now. Like I said, if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. I don't give a shit. You know, this all a rough draft to a doctoral thesis. I have no life if I'm sitting here talking to myself, watching movies and shit. But you know what? The summer's almost over, but this shit's only heating up.